Professor Usha Thakkar is a scholar of repute who has also played an active role in public life. She retired as professor and head Department of Political Science, SNDT, Women's University, Mumbai. She has been a vice president of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. At present, she is president and trustee of the Bhavan Gandhi Sangrahalaya. Professor Thakkar did her PhD from the University of Bombay in 1973. The subject of her thesis was Diplomacy in Kautilya's Arthashastra. Right from the beginning of her career, she has been a recipient of several scholarships and prizes and prestigious fellowships. Special mention must be made of a few. The postdoctoral Fulbright Fellowship, which gave her an opportunity to pursue her research at the University of Chicago in 1981-82, and later in 1990 as a senior Fulbright Fellow at Cornell University. Professor Usha Thakkar was also awarded a fellowship from the Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute for pursuing her academic research in York University. Professor Thakkar's focus of her research has been in the field of Indian politics and women's issues. Her research papers have been published in a number of national and international journals and publications. She has authored, co-authored, and co-edited many publications, including William Erskine, a monograph in the series Founders and Guardians of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, Women in Indian Society, Culture, and the Making of Identity in Contemporary India, 0 Point Bombay, in and around Horniman Circle. Her outstanding research work includes an in-depth study of various aspects of Mahatma Gandhi's life and his contribution to India's freedom struggle. The book, Understanding Gandhi, in conversation with Fred J. Blum, makes very interesting reading. Her book, titled Gandhi in Bombay, Towards Swaraj, provides a detailed account of Gandhi's stay in Bombay during the struggle for independence and contains a wealth of information on this period, which is not available elsewhere. In 2018, Dr. Usha Thakkar was made an honorary fellow of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai for her contribution to Gandhian studies and women's studies. Today, she will talk on her latest book on the Congress radio Usha Mehta and the underground radio station of 1942. It narrates the compelling story of passion and daring of a 22-year-old girl, a student of Wilson College, Usha Mehta, who with the help of her colleagues had the courage to start an underground radio station in August 1942 to broadcast news about the struggle against coercive British rule. Lucille, you'll be riveted to this book when you read it. Now, I will request Dr. Usha Thakkar to tell us about this. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. It's so nice to see all my friends here. And I thank the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, especially its vice presidents, Meenal Kshiresagar and Dr. Shehnaz Nalwala, its honorary secretary, Dr. Usha Vijay Lakshmi, and its president, Vispi Balapuria, for inviting me for this lecture this evening. And thanks to Dr. Mangala Sardeshpande for her kind words for my introduction. Today, I'm going to speak about Congress Radio, as Mangala said, about my new book. The fascinating story of the underground Congress Radio demands attention because of the important role it played in India's freedom struggle. It's the story of a committed group of young patriots who in 1942 operated the Congress Radio, passionately propagating the message of freedom and disseminating information about the struggle against the coercive rules of the British government. The Congress Radio made history within a brief span of time and transmitted reliable news to the people, generating confidence among them and unnerving the British. Equally impressive was its power to kindle the flame of freedom in the hearts of its listeners and inspire them during those difficult times. At the same time, it communicated to the youth the immense value of ideals and dreams and how significant voluntary and vigorous efforts were to make these seemingly impossible dreams a reality. I have been interested in the subject of the Congress radio for decades. Dr. Usha Mehta, Usha Ben for many of us, was my professor and guide for my PhD. I was fortunate to have a long association with her, strong and affectionate bond with her for years till she passed away in 2000. She was an important member of the Congress radio team, the only woman in the group. I would often ask her about the Congress radio, and she would talk in a nostalgic way about the Congress radio and 1942, and would murmur her favorite lines from William Wordsworth. Bliss was it in that dawn, to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. Listening to her, a string of questions would come gushing to my mind. How did the Congress radio operate? Who operated it? Where? How? Who helped? What did it broadcast? How long did it last? How were the operators arrested? How was the case conducted? What was the judgment? Many pieces of this jigsaw puzzle needed to be put together. There were many subplots intertwined with the main narrative. My long conversations with Usha Ben, precious papers given by her, and the material from the Maharashtra State Archives helped me to write this book on the Congress radio, and my friends have always supported me. As you know, our city was very much on the forefront of Fit India movement. The Congress radio originated and operated here. All the members of the team of Congress radio were from here. They operated from various locations in the city. They were arrested here. The case was conducted here. But though situated in Bombay, the Congress radio reverberated far beyond the city's shores. It inspired freedom lovers in various parts of the country, and a re-exploration of the working of the Congress radio is both educating and energizing. It is like a fresh breeze, blowing the ideals of freedom and selfless work for the nation into our times. Now, the story of the Congress radio starts with the historic AICC session on 7th and 8th August in Bombay. On 8th August, Mahatma Gandhi told people, here is a mantra, a short one that I give you. You may imprint it in your hearts and let every breath of yours give expression to it. The mantra is do or die. The arrest of Gandhi and other Congress leaders on the 9th August led to an outbreak of incidents of throwing stones and soda water bottles on trams, buses, and cars, and also at the police. The reports of the British officers record the uneasy atmosphere in the city and the restlessness among the students. The prevalent feeling among the students was education can wait, but not freedom. In fact, the agitations and the protests that followed the AICC session exasperated Viceroy Lord Linlithgow to such an extent that he wrote to the British Prime Minister Churchill on 31st August 1942 that I am engaged here in meeting by far the most serious rebellion since that of 1857, the gravity and extent of which we have so far concealed from the world for reasons of military security. Usha Ben, Vitthal Das alias Babubhai Thakkar and the friends had attended the AICC session at Gwalior Tank Maidan, now August Kranti Maidan, and they were energized. In fact, listening to Gandhi had an electrifying effect on them. They decided to plunge in the movement. The idea of establishing a radio station appealed to them. They thought that when the press was gagged and news banned, a transmitter would be very helpful in keeping the people informed about the latest development in the movement. Today, in the times of internet and social media, we may not think much of the radio's importance, but at that time, it had a powerful presence. By 1942, the radio had become an important means of communication. Now, the challenge before Usha and Babubhai and friends was how to make the radio. Who would be the technical experts? Evidently, they didn't have any technical expertise. Babubhai and Ravindra Mehta knew Nariman Printer. Printer was a technician connected with the Bombay Technical Institute and had an amateur transmitting license before the outbreak of the war. This license was cancelled when war broke out in 1939 and he dismantled the transmitter. But he kept some parts of the transmitting apparatus with himself without letting anyone know about it. He was asked to build a transmitter by Babubhai. Now, it's very difficult to say whether Babubhai asked him or whether Printer approached Babubhai. But Printer used some parts lying with him and some minor parts were purchased by Babubhai and Printer. Printer then assembled the transmitter and it was ready for trial. Printer fitted an aerial in his own house, but soon after wanted the station to be shifted somewhere else. And now the drama starts, the story starts. It has suspense, thrill, mystery, and at the same time, ideals and passion for India's freedom. The Congress radio operation was started when the movement in Bombay was at its height and when the involvement of the students was intense. At every stage of its operation, there were challenges like those of planning and organizing, collecting news and speeches, managing regular programs, distributing work, changing locations of the radio, and playing the games of hide and seek with the police. And the guiding spirit remained the intense love for the nation, unquestionable and all-pervasive. The Bombay Congress Bulletin of 3rd September 1942 had announced that the Congress broadcasting station would be broadcasting at 8:45 p.m. and there was much excitement among the people. See, the Congress radio team was very bold. It announced with all the courage. The people were excited, but the police also became alert. There were broadcasting of programs regularly from 27th August 1942 to 12th November 1942, except 15, 16, and 17 October, when the set was being upgraded. The programs started with the song Hindustan Hamara and ended with Vande Mataram. In the beginning, there was only one program at 8:45 p.m., but later, morning programs were also introduced. The team of the Congress radio was fully aware of the impending threat of being nabbed by the British government, but was willing to take the risk. The task required skillful operation coupled with swift changes in the locations, as operating from a single place would invite attention and possible arrest. Members had purchased a bedding with a hold-all, a hat box, 2 suitcases, and a water bottle to give them the appearance of bona fide travelers very cleverly. Now we find that during the short period of the operation of the radio, It operated from 5 different locations, all in thickly populated areas of the city. Very often, while renting places, fictitious names were used as tenants. On 27th August, a flat in Sea View building at Chopati was rented with a fictitious name of Keshavlal Chhaganlal as a tenant. On 10th September, a place in Ratan Mahal at Walkeshwar Road was rented, and on 25th September, the radio was shifted to Ajit Villa in Gamdevi. On 4th October, a flat in Lakshmi Bhavan at Sandhurst Road was rented, again with a fictitious name of C.R. Thakkar. And on 15th October, Parekhwadi flat with room number 103 to 106 at Girgam Beck Road was taken on rent in the name of Mohanlal Desai. Paradise Bungalow on Warden Road near Mahalakshmi Temple was rented in the name of S.B. Pandya. But before the team could shift to this place, they were arrested at Parekhwadi. Printer, his assistant Rustam Mirza, Ravindra Mehta, Bipin Inamdar, and Ramchandra Kilewala helped the operation of the Congress radio. Now, Babubhai's efforts to make the transmitter more powerful led him to Nanak Motwani at Chicago Radio Company. The beginning of the recorded programs at Lakshmi Bhavan in October 1942 was an important milestone in the journey of the Congress radio. Until then, the members of the Congress radio used to read the programs directly into the microphone. But when they realized that they were not being heard as clearly as the records of the songs Hindustan Hamara and Vande Mataram, they thought of broadcasting recorded programs. Usha had said with pride, "We used to start the program with the announcement, 'This is the Congress radio calling on 42.34 meters from somewhere in India.'" Now, many of us who knew her must have heard it in her own voice. It was a different thrill altogether. She further said, "We used to relay news, speeches, instructions, and appeals to different classes of people. For this, there was a batch of speakers and writers, including Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, Achyut Patwardhan, Moinuddin Harris, Kumi Dastur, who later became Kamal Wood, K.A. Abbas, and myself. So records were cut in their voices. Vitthal Bhai Jhaveri was in charge of this work. Because of the risk involved, we could not take the speakers to the broadcasting station, of which Babu Bhai was mainly in charge. As in the case of our broadcasting station, we also used to shift our recording station at regular intervals. Now, Congress radio seemed at this time to be well established, reaching people. But the police was ruffled and was trying hard to locate this underground radio station. After the announcement about the Congress radio on 3rd September, Deputy Inspector of Police Ferguson was entrusted with the task of keeping a watch and finding out the location of the radio station. He monitored the Congress radio diligently. After tuning into the station, he would ask the reporters to take down notes, and he himself would drive around listening to the broadcast. He located the areas as lying between Chopati and Sipi Tank. Thereafter, the area was further narrowed down to Sandhurst Road, Girgam Road, Queens Road, and Chopati, all very familiar places to us Mumbaikars. Ganesh Keshav Kopche, the Inspector of Police, CID Special Branch, played a key role in the arrest of the persons involved in the operation of the Congress radio. He was following all the major and minor characters involved in the radio project carefully and meticulously. Following his inquiries and the arrest of some persons, combined with the betrayal of Printer the technician and assistance received from the military and naval authorities, led Kokje and the police to the location and seizure of the Congress radio at Parekwadi while it was actually in operation. The secrets of the Congress radio collapsed like a house of cards as Printer betrayed his colleagues. Printer revealed the whereabouts of the important places from where the Congress radio operated. On 12th November, Printer took Deputy Commissioner Taylor and Kokje to the 5th floor of Parekwadi. The door of room number 106 was broken up. According to Kokje, it was 5 or 10 minutes after 9 p.m. Usha Ben and Chandrakant Jhaveri were found attending to the operation of the set. Kokje found them playing the record of Vande Mataram. And after they entered the room, the Panchanama was made, but the fuse blew out and kerosene lights had to be brought from outside. The police found a transmitting set in working order with the serial 120 gramophone records, a Philips wireless receiving set, a bedding, a headbox, and a suitcase. So that means much of the evidence that was required. Around this time, Babu Bhai, Printer, Vittal Bhai Jhaveri, and Nanak Motwane were also arrested. All these 120 gramophone records expressed patriotic feelings and nationalist thoughts. It was found that a few gramophone records with speeches and information contained matter critical of the British rule. Out of these records, 7 were commercial records, but others were home-cut records. And later it was also found that 35 of these records tallied with the monitoring reports of the police, and 2 were in Usha Ben's voice. Usha Ben remembered the day very clearly, the day of her arrest. On 12th November, during the daytime, she and Chandrakant Jhaveri were at Babu Bhai's office. Now, this is also a very dramatic scene we can visualize. They saw Padnekar, Deputy Inspector of Police CID, with the police came to arrest Babu Bhai. Since Printer was there, he was also arrested. But Usha Ben asked Babu Bhai very casually and innocently, Bhai, what shall I tell doctor about mother's health? Now here, doctor means Dr. Lohia and mother means transmitter. Babu Bhai also replied calmly, tell him I cannot come today. Even though I know that mother is serious, he may decide whether to change the prescription or continue with the same medicine. That means to continue with the broadcast or to change the location or program or whatever. Usha Ben rushed to the place of recording and met Dr. Lohia, and it was decided that the show must go on. The program would be continued. Usha Ben went home, informed her mother, and rushed for the broadcasting station. Chandrakant Jhaveri accompanied her despite being aware of the risk. They played the whole program. Program was relayed completely. But when Usha Ben was putting Vande Mataram record, a big battalion of policemen came, entered the room, and arrested them. The rigorous probing and stern examinations of Printer, Mirza, and others by the police opened the floodgates of the evidence required. The investigations were complete. Now, another part in the drama begins. The case was heard and decided in the court of the special judge appointed under Section 4 of the Special Criminal Code Ordinance 1942. On 22nd April 1943, Special Judge N.S. Lokur charged Vittal Das alias Babubhai Thakkar, Vittal Das Jhaveri, Usha Mehta, Chandrakant Jhaveri, and Nanak Motwane. A prima facie case having been made out, charges were framed under Section 120B of the Indian Penal Code, Section 20 of the Telegraph Act, and some of the Defense of India rules. Charges were serious. It was said that between 14th August and 12th November 42, at Bombay, the accused agreed and conspired among and between themselves and others to do or cause to be done illegal acts, possessing, establishing, maintaining, and working illegally wireless telegraph and wireless telegraphy apparatus, and committing without lawful authority or excuse prejudicial acts and spreading prejudicial reports through the said wireless telegraph and apparatus. And their acts and reports brought hatred or contempt and spread disaffection towards His Majesty's forces. They undermined public confidence in the national credit and in the government currency notes, which were legal tender in India, and encouraged the public generally to refuse and deter payment of land revenue and taxes payable to government. They prejudiced the war efforts and defense of British India and the public safety. Some eminent lawyers appeared for both sides. It must have been very dramatic in the court. Sohrab Vimadalal with C.B. Welker, instructed by the public prosecutor N.K. Pettigara, appeared for the Crown. Lawyers for the defendants included P.L. Thakkar, Vaman Thakur, K.M. Munshi, with Nanubhai Desai, instructed by A.C. Krishnamurthy and Matubhai Jamiyat Raman Madan, S.R. Tendolkar, M.M. Jape, H.P. Thakur, M.C. Setalvat, and A.B. Thakur. The defense lawyers marshaled their legal acumen to defend the young team. They raised a doubt as to whether the programs that were being monitored by the police reporters were actually being broadcast from the transmitter at Parekwadi. Doubts were raised about the frequency of the crystal that was used for the transmitter. It was also argued that all the records that were attached at the Panchnama on 13th November 1942 might not have been there when the police raided the room on 12th November night. And the gramophone records could not be considered as documents. However, the judge had plenty of proofs. Printer had provided many details of the operation of the radio and its various locations, and the police had traced the trajectories of all the locations. Moreover, the police reporters had monitored the broadcast from 9th October to 2nd November 1942, and they produced the original shortened notes, the transcripts in longhand, and the reports they made to their superiors from day to day. 35 out of 120 records found at Parekwadi tallied with the corresponding monitoring notes. Testimonies of more than 50 persons were collected. The case generated a lot of excitement and interest among the people, but due to severe restraints on the press, the details could not be published. The trial of the 5 accused in the Congress radio case moved speedily. The judge and the lawyers meticulously tried to sift the facts from the evidence collected, and the accused witnessed the drama in the court with equanimity. The judgment was delivered On 14th May 1942, there was enough proof to prove that Vittal Das alias Babubhai Thakkar, 28-year-old, was involved in the case right from the beginning. Usha Mehta, 22-year-old, and Chandrakant Jhaveri, 23-year-old, were caught red-handed with a wireless apparatus, a transmitter, and other transmitting parts without a license. Usha Ben was an active member of the group, efficiently managing important as well as odd jobs like compiling news, writing messages and instructions to the people from freedom fighters, and typing the programs spoken into the microphone. The judgment recorded that Usha Mehta was found to have joined the conspiracy from the beginning and had continued taking active part in it. When she was asked in the court, "What do you want to say regarding the evidence adduced against you?" she answered quite calmly, "Nothing." She did not want to make any statement in her defense. So to the question, "So do you want to make any statement in your own defense?" her answer was no. The judge observed that Usha Ben deserved all the credit for refusing to state a falsehood to save herself. Some years after, Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, in his letter from Central Jail to Professor Harold Lasky, wrote a paragraph about Usha Mehta and had written that had this young woman of rare attainment and rare courage been Spanish or Russian, your countrymen would have glamorized her into a heroine. Now, charges against Vittalbhai Jhaveri and Nanak Motwane could not be proved. So the judge sentenced Babubhai Thakkar to undergo rigorous imprisonment for 5 years, Usha Mehta to undergo rigorous imprisonment for 4 years, and Chandrakant Jhaveri to undergo rigorous imprisonment for 1 year. Vittalbhai Jhaveri and Nanak Motwane were acquitted. Now I'd like to say something about the broadcasts. The British rulers had faced a situation getting increasingly uneasy in 1942. The Second World War was at its height. The Japanese were at the doorstep, and the simmering internal crisis brought about by the Quit India movement were making the government more and more determined to block out the news about the movement. The National War Front was launched in 42 May to muster support for the government's war effort and to foster anti-Congress propaganda. Press ordinances warned editors against publishing articles in support of the Congress call for a mass movement. Because of the political unrest, a curfew order was promulgated in Bombay on 9th August. So the public, anxious to know more about the political turmoil and turbulence, naturally turned to any medium they could. And Congress radio at that time seemed to be a powerful medium to disseminate news. The broadcast fulfilled their expectations. People's protest in the country, repression by the British rule, dislocation of railways and destruction of other means of communication such as telegraph and telephone all formed part of their coverage. Even the interior regions of the country were not neglected. Usha Ben had said with pride that we used to receive news from all over India through special messengers. We were the first to give the news of the Chittagong bomb raid, of the Jamshedpur strike, and of the happenings in Balia. We broadcast the full description of the horrendous atrocities and rapes committed in Chimur in Central Province. The newspapers dared not touch these subjects under the prevailing conditions. Only the Congress radio could defy the orders and tell the people what was really happening. Our listeners helped people in spreading the news to the people at large. The process of presenting the correct news was not easy, as there were no formal machinery, nor any regular paid staff or a well-set office. The broadcasts were daily bulletins made of compilations of news from different places in the country. The nationalist workers and volunteers would collect the news of or information, pass them on to the leaders like Dr. Loya or Sucheta Kripalani, who in turn would get them to the Congress radio team. And in their urgency to relay the information at the earliest, the team had little time to put the news in a coherent format. Consequently, the broadcasts at the best present a collage of the happenings in the country. Each broadcast was an independent unit full of its own thrill of collating with care the news that was suppressed by the British authorities. Each unit brought its own political perspective that was passionately patriotic and nationalist. Usha Ben talked about how she would sit quietly in a corner, taking care to appear casual, and would hurriedly put the information, would write on a paper and be ready for the broadcast. Her handwritten copies of the broadcast are silent witnesses to that process. The records, mostly containing the speeches of the leaders, would be played as and when required. In her words, presenting an engaging program on the radio with the correct news was the only concern. The Congress radio attempted to broadcast news about the happenings in the country from nationalist perspective. The people heard about the police and military brutalities as well as people's protests. The news also advocated self-sufficiency of villages and advised the people on various issues like stopping work for factories and railways. The bold broadcasts ardently announced remain an important source for learning more about the course of the Quit India movement in various parts of India and reflect the intensity of the efforts of patriots to achieve independence. The Congress radio's broadcasts captured the mood of the times and the fervor of the movement. They were fearless, commenting on the ruthless behavior of the British officials and sacrifices of the people for freedom. The Congress radio was convinced that Quit India campaign was the only basis for an effective mobilization of the Indian people. It had confidently declared that it is our last struggle and win we must. In another broadcast, it declared, "Let us make our strength felt. Let us do or die." The Congress radio advised the listeners to call their friends, neighbors, and those who did not own the radio to listen to the broadcast. It boldly proclaimed that, remember, the Congress radio runs not for entertainment, not even for propaganda, but for giving certain directives to the Indian people in their fight for freedom. The radio accepted the uneasy and curious coexistence of the techniques of disruptions and disturbances with Gandhi's ideals and his unquestioned leadership. The socialist leaders like Dr. Loya continued their bulletins on the Congress radio, proclaiming acceptance of Gandhi as their leader. The Congress radio tried to guide the people in their daily life. It enumerated the duties that every Indian could perform without any risk. This included not transacting any business with the British, withdrawing money from the government bank. People were advised to picket the offices of foreign goods and factories peacefully. They were further advised to collect funds for the national work, achieve Hindu-Muslim unity, keep charkha in homes, and make the villages self-supporting. Through its broadcasts, radio tenaciously appealed to the people to leave cities and go to villages to withdraw deposits from the post offices and not to visit cinema houses. There was also a fear in the authorities that Congress radio could be connected with the fifth column elements. But such doubts were put to rest by HVR Iyengar, Additional Secretary to the Government of Bombay Home Department, and C.H. Bristow, Advisor to the Government of Bombay. Now, in the end, I would like to remember Usha Ben again. Once I had asked her that what was the motivating factor that led you working with the Congress radio, despite knowing all the dangers connected. And she had replied very calmly, I just did what I had to. I just rendered my duty to my motherland. So in the end, I would like to conclude by stating that Congress radio has carved a niche for itself in the history of the freedom struggle by its sincere efforts for the dissemination of information about the freedom struggle in the times where means of communications were limited and restraints imposed by the government were strict and severe. It stands out as an example of courage and conviction to die for the sake of the nation's independence. Its voice of freedom, though short-lived, has left an indelible mark on the history of our freedom struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Usha Thakkar. I think as desired before, it is time for the vote of thanks. On behalf of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, I propose a vote of thanks. The talk by Dr. Usha Thakkar was very interesting and informative. In a short time, she gave deep insights into the Quit India movement and the Congress radio. And as she has promised, her talk on this difficult period was full of suspense, thrill, and excitement. I thank Dr. Thakkar for giving this excellent talk on Congress radio, Voice of Freedom in 1942. I thank both Mrs. Meenal Shirsagar and Dr. Shahnaz Nalwala for actively planning this program. I thank the audience for their enthusiastic participation in our program. Thank you all. Good night.
Yes.